All right, welcome to the next podcast. This week it'll be interesting. I think what's top of mind for a lot of people is tariffs. So Naveen and I are going to, with no real economic background, going to be discussing tariffs today. And one of the things that's fascinating as we dive into this tariff space is, haven't we seen these things before, right? If you think about the economy in the past, we're living in a free trade world, but the world wasn't always free trade, right? So if you go back in history, there have been protectionist policies throughout society, all the way back from like mercantile exchange to the Roman Empire, through the Silk Road, like those things have existed. But what's fascinating is I saw this pattern as I was thinking about this topic yesterday, that I can look at the lens of the U.S. history first in the lens of an economic policy, not a social policy, not a morality policy. So if we go all the way back to the Boston Tea Party, right, pre-U.S., it's about a tax on tea.
Yeah.
Like last I checked, is an import tariff.
That's right. Yep.
So then it's like, okay, we're angry. We want to form a country over this tariff policy, right?
Yep.
And then Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, in the crafting of the Constitution, Alexander Hamilton was advocating for federal power and economic power over tariffs. Like he wanted high tariffs to fund and build the federal government. And Jefferson was just like, no, we want low tariffs because we're a consumer economy, right? The U.S. is consuming. The South was more consuming. The North was more manufacturing.
Right.
And that extended to Abraham Lincoln, who wanted high tariffs in the North, and the South wanting low tariffs from a consumption economy, which led to the Civil War, actually. So we can look at all of these tariffs that way, even World War I, World War II. How did people decide to be on the Axis or allies, or how did the sides pair off? We tend to write history in the lens of morals or right and wrong, but a lot of times it's about economic policy.
Trading blocks.
Yeah, like I think you've seen the Kuwait thing, right? And what was it? The Desert Storm and
Right.
all of the Saudi, like the Middle East stuff.
Yeah.
Was that about something? Was that about religion? Was that an attack on Muslims, or was it about oil?
Oil.
Right? So when we think about like the world history, I think tariffs have shaped that. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a couple aspects to it. One is, and by the way, I should be clear, we're both not economists. I barely deal with money at all in my day job. I'm the engineer, right? I mean, but nonetheless, I do think of things in terms of systems. And I think that tariffs are really I think a way to apply control over what is really a global system, right? It's like, okay, what is the tariff? It's like, okay, I'm going to buy a good from you. I'm going to assemble it or turn it from textile into clothing, and then I'm going to sell it to someone else, but I'm going to take that money to go buy another good, right? These are all trading cycles. And I think it's very simplistic to think of tariffs as a way of, taxing one country or another country. It's really just putting pressure on one particular vector of what is really like a global manufacturing system. Mm-hmm. And I think what you're talking about when you're talking about history, it's like, well, do you import more than you export? Well, then you're going to be favoring one system over the other. And in the case of the Civil War, if you have different opinions, that's going to lead to massive financial ramifications for one party versus the other. I think that there's a lot of, I don't even know if I want to call them secondary, first order effects of tariffs that I think are not really.
But I think you described a system as, taxes, right? So I know you talked about income tax. Right. Explain your income tax theory to me.
So I think that, for example, so I think there's another thing to think about historically. So historically, when we look at tariffs, the way that governments actually gained their money was by taxing goods traveling through their territory, through their ports, and so on. And that was just, how governments funded themselves. I think in modern industrialized society, we are all not familiar with that. Our government is obviously funded by income taxes. So we have an income tax. It's a progressive income tax system where the more you earn, the more you pay. That's where the government makes its money. Tariffs have sort of left the economy largely. I think this is kind of a side effect of free trade and globalization, but it's no longer the mechanism by which governments fund themselves. It's become truly a policy mechanism, right? So I think even historically, when you're talking about, ancient era and so on, there was always like some form of income and a form of policy.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's become purely policy, right? It's a thing that you apply to systems to try and change.
But let's think about and again, this is now just a game theory, right? Like, what if you flip the system where you say, okay, we don't want double taxation.
Yep.
So we're going to fund the federal government through tariffs and eliminate the income tax.
Oh man, I mean, yes, I guess it's theoretically possible. But I think we have chosen to move away from that system.
We have, but if you go back in history,
that was
we're living through a free trade era.
Absolutely.
There have been other systems before that,
absolutely.
Right?
So I mean, I think if you go down that path, you go to a consumption tax era, right? So it's basically, if you consume more than me, you pay the government more than I do, right? Whereas right now, if you make more than me, you pay the government more than I do, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a fundamental change in our system, which means, that has massive ramifications on society, on how, if we are actually considering, if somebody out there is considering that kind of a change, dear Lord, that.
If you think there was a consumption tax, you think that would help save the environment because we'd consume less?
No, I think it would just be a rebalance of power. I think all of these things, I think at the end of the day, humans are humans, right? I think these are all just power struggles. I don't think there's anything unique about any of this. It's just who is in power and how is power balanced. I think a tariff-based system, I don't know, and I guess I'd have to think about who that affects, but I'd have to imagine that that's going to affect the average person more than anyone else. Everything you buy is now subject to policy decisions, right?
Well, I think that's you see two sides of that in the media today with the tariff stuff, right? Some people are arguing the end consumers are going to get hurt with higher prices of their groceries and those types of things. The current administration's arguing more that, hey, this rebalance is temporal, companies won't pass on those prices, and everything will rebalance.
Actually,
right?
There's a news announcement today. I think I mentioned earlier that I'm a gamer. I feel like there's already data points that are making that commentary not theoretical anymore.
Okay.
So Nintendo just announced the Switch 2. They literally, I think it was yesterday or maybe a few days ago, announced the pre-release price for it. It was going to be $449 in the United States.
Yeah.
Literally yesterday, they said, we've canceled all pre-sale pricing for the Switch. We will announce the price of the Switch on April 9th when more information is known, right? It hasn't even been released. They were like, oh, hold on, wait. We actually don't know what this thing is going to cost, right? And so that's not them eating the tariff. They're basically saying, we're going to pass this on, right?
Well, I think one of the comments that I think you've shared with me in the past was businesses need predictability, right? So part of that, because you describe all of this as a system.
Yep.
And one of the things in the system is not the government, but just the business, how a business works, right? Businesses need a tolerance and a bound of predictability to operate in. In some businesses have no tolerances and bounds.
Right.
So if you're assuming that predictability theory, which I think you advocate strongly,
yeah,
Nintendo's playing into that. They're saying, hey, this is my cost, this is my margin of my product, this is my end customer pricing.
Yep.
And if one of those things doesn't work, then I can't price?
Exactly. But that has massive ramifications, right? So what does that mean? So I guess kind of coming back to I guess there's another side effect of the income tax world was that it didn't affect goods in the way that tariffs do, right? Goods are now directly impacted by these things. Mm-hmm. So I think we are now seeing a world where if I was to create a tech device and I'm like, okay, this is how I would think of things before. I'd say, okay, people have X amount of disposable income. I want to kind of target that. What's my target market for a gaming device? I could probably sell it to them for $400-ish, right? Now you get slammed with a 30% tariff on the parts, which, by the way, is probably maybe more than that. It's like, okay, well, now I'm going to sell you a Nintendo Switch for $700 because that's what the goods make it cost. do you even have a business model? Like, how do you know?
Well, and again, this is now where we can get into some Friedman economics, right? Because when all of these things were being debated, you're thinking about wealth and economies as a pie.
Right.
So if you're like, okay, the reason the cost and the labor is such is like, okay, if you're funding the government through income tax, you're putting that, like, the less burden on the income side of things. So yes, they can afford the $700, right? So if you think about the system,
Sorry, if you fund the government through a tariff system, you're saying
tariff system,
then I have more disposable
yeah,
income.
you have more disposable income
Yep.
to make that work. So in the Friedman economic policy model, he was arguing that, like, you're playing with inflation of consumer prices, you're playing with trade deficit,
Yep.
and you're playing with income. Like, those are three variables that you're playing with.
Yes.
Right? And in product engineering world, which might be this audience, it's the time quality feature matrix of, like, product software engineering, right? And translating that to economic terms, you typically can get two but can't get all three.
Right.
Right? So if you zoom out and look at it, I think these things have been debated, right? Like, there's a lot of history. And I think you made a comment, which I'd like to kind of pull at, is it used to be debated more.
Yeah. Yeah. We were chatting a little bit about this beforehand. It's like there's a lot of really good, well thought out debates on just economic policy in general.
Yeah.
Right. And they are well constructed arguments. Milton Friedman has some of them.
Yeah.
And whether or not they're right, they make you think, right?
Yeah.
And you think that, like, if this, then that. That's not necessarily what's going on right now. So, like, I do want to challenge, I think you're trying to introduce a little bit of structure of, like, well, if we go down a tariff-based economy, maybe we can relax an income-based economy. Like, I'm not sure that any of that is actually being thought through today, right? Right now, I view this as purely a policy avenue. So though it was the case that governments were funded by tariffs in the past, I think we are going to live in the world where it's an income-based economy. I really don't think we're trying. On the table is a discussion of flipping that. I think what's really happening is more of this protectionist side of the policy, which is I'm going to use tariffs as a mechanism to encourage production in my own country versus getting cheap goods from an external country, and therefore I get more manufacturing here. I think that's the thought process.
I think that's right, and that comes down to, of the three factors, we're optimizing in this round for trade deficit.
Yep.
Right? So I think the narrative is pretty clear. It's like, the idea of free trade was interesting when it was first introduced, because in the original idea of free trade, it was like, let's assume that, people do have income taxes is their way of dealing with things.
Yep.
And there are no protectionist policies in an ideal world. And the tariff is zero for import and export, generally, or 1%, like cost of transfer.
Right.
Right? But uniform. Right now, we have trade imbalances where, like, people are like, okay, I don't need to, like, tax American cheese because it's not as good as French cheese. So I'm not worried about tariffing cheese, but I need to tariff technology going into China. Yep. And then when we need to tariff cars coming into the U.S. to protect Detroit.
Right.
So
or
I think
steel
right. Like, so all of these things are built to protect some sector. Like, so I think we both agree that right now it's a policy decision meant to correct for trade deficit.
Yeah, and I would say till now, like, let's say the last 100 years almost.
Yeah.
I think it's been used as a mechanism to gently adjust the system to adjust for these things. So let's say we talk about something like steel manufacturing, right? So, okay, it might be more expensive just because employees are more expensive in the United States. The cost of building a factory in the United States is higher. It is cheaper, therefore, just on, like, unit cost to build steel in China and pay for the cost of shipping it here. And therefore, there could have been an adjustment policy of I'm going to tariff it to equalize the playing field for local manufacturing, right? That I think is a adjustment policy.
Well, kind of, but I think we got to separate out primary tariffs versus reciprocal tariffs, right? So, because most of these are import tariffs, right?
Yes.
So we can say we want to yes, it's cheaper for them to do it in China, so the U.S. is going to set an import tariff on that. But we also create goods that we ship to China.
True.
Right? So the second side of that is then the reciprocal tariff. And if it started, right, and this is from a, chicken and egg, what came first standpoint. If China had a 40% import tariff already and we had a 0% import tariff, right? From a policy of goods and consumption, we've had a trade imbalance being built in for that. Now, you could argue that the difference was the cost of labor, and it was a correctionist measure based on unit economics to normalize unit economics.
Right.
So some element of tariff could do that, but in a free capitalist economy, the point, and I think this was what Friedman was arguing in Friedman capitalism, is free markets just means, the best of Darwinism,
Yes.
right? Like survival of the fittest, best unit economics wins. If it's cheaper to manufacture it over there,
Then it's better to make it.
then make it over there, right? So we've been following a societal pattern that is going down that avenue for a long time.
Yes. Yeah, and I guess what I'm trying to say is that historically, because I just want to separate it from what happened. Was that yesterday? Dear
Yesterday.
Lord. Yesterday is that historically there's been some use of tariffs as a way to adjust these things. So it could have been to balance out trade.
Yeah.
It could have also been that I want to develop my own infrastructure and manufacturing. Therefore, I'm going to place an import tariff on external goods while I build that up internally. So like high tech, right? It is a rational thing for a company to say, I'm going to tax a high tech good that comes in from a foreign country so they can build up that infrastructure and skill internally until my economies of scale get up high enough that maybe I don't need that anymore.
Yeah.
But what just happened is, I don't think any of the things we've discussed so far, right?
Because you think they're blunt instruments.
I think what just happened is a game theory exercise.
Okay.
So I think let's look at this. So by the way, I'm trying to maybe apply logic to a system that might not have any logic in it. But
a lot of people are trying.
But suppose there is some logic here.
Yeah.
One thing that I could think of is, we've just come out of this post-COVID world. The United States has actually, we talked about soft landing and inflation and, the average wage of employees. The United States actually fared fairly well relative to the global economy over the last 4 or 5 years, right? So we're in again, relatively speaking, a better shape than the rest of the world. Furthermore, most trade, like global GDP, is heavily biased towards the United States. Like we're the largest economy in the world. So if you like chaos and you say that, okay, tariffs are a trade policy, but also just a policy tool in general, let's just not say that we're balancing anything. There is no goal to this, right? We're not trying to protect, we're not trying to build up manufacturing. We're not trying to balance any trade deficit. We're just going to put a massive amount of pressure into the system, and we're the power player. And therefore, we now are in a position to, in a upcoming negotiation cycle that I really hope is going to happen, we are in a position, according to the people maybe thinking this way, that we are suited to set up better outcomes than we had prior to entering the situation. Right?
Yeah, look, there's two patterns that I think support your theory. One is if you to look internally, not tariffs, but Doge, right? I think Elon was applying that same
chaos theory
to the government. He's like, let me just put pressure in here and see what happens.
Yep.
And there will be some fallout and certain things will break, but it seemed fairly chaos theory.
Yep.
So, there's I always say things are either, have two factors, psychological or sociological. This is the internal factor and the external factor. Internal factors, let's do it to ourselves. External factors, let's do it to everybody else.
Yep.
Right? So that supports that same kind of chaos theory argument. And I guess the book Art of the Deal basically says, step 1, punch someone in the face. Step 2, now you're at a table to have a talk. Right? So if you boil down the book of the art of the deal, it was like Dick Cheney right? Like that was the first step in it. And I think we've seen some pattern, where that might be a negotiating tactic. The problem is, as a business leader, myself as a business leader,
Right.
we can't assume it's a negotiation tactic.
Right.
I have to make decisions and policies and decide how to react
Yep.
and plan for the highest level of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, right? That I think we've seen probably bigger than COVID,
Yep. Yep.
right? So like I think that's why the S&P and the stock market and everything's reacting is businesses like predictability, stock likes predictability. So this period of uncertainty creates a lot of weird, unpredictable, unmodelable behavior.
Yeah, and I think we're already seeing, like we come back to the Nintendo of America, right? They're making business decisions based on something that happened yesterday. They've probably been planning the launch of this thing for, I don't know, years.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're like, oh, in a second they have to flip their decision. So I mean, how do we deal with that? Like, what?
Well, so the first thing is like, let's go back, like, let's recap what we've covered, right? Because I think one of the things we see right now in these tariffs being used for policy, a lot of it has historically been grounded in protection.
Right.
Right? I'm protecting something. I'm protecting my infrastructure. I'm protecting my people. I'm protecting my wages. Like, it's using this vehicle to protect something, right? And if you think about that vehicle as a protectionist mechanism, right, then you're like, okay, maybe I can model that. Maybe I can model protectionism. Maybe I can decide, okay, if I'm trying to protect this, this is one scenario. If I'm trying to protect this, this is another scenario. But these are very, very complicated models. And I think the thing that is different than all the historical times where this has happened, and this is what I would call flaws in the historical extrapolation, right? One, previously, when you're trying to protect jobs and labor, you'd be like, oh, this thing, like we're equalizing the cost of labor in China versus the cost of labor here.
Right.
This is not presupposing that AI has changed the equation of the fundamental cost of labor. If you're asking me to do this now, I'm like, okay, well, robot factories?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so these levers that we're pulling based on historical statistics and patterns were not built in a time where people actually had AI as a tool.
Yeah.
So that's a fundamental flaw in the protectionist model.
Or I mean, automation in general, but yeah, AI makes automation just trivial.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're right. So I think your point is basically that, okay, suppose the goal was to bring back manufacturing to the United States. That may happen. Doesn't mean anybody's getting employed doing it, right?
Correct.
Right.
So like, so you could get more GDP output, but not pass it down to the labor workforce.
Right.
Right. And secondarily, this is not just about productivity, but the free trade thing. Like there used to be I remember like we talked about Oppenheimer in the past, right?
Right.
Like there was a time where information trade secrets were hoarded, right? Research was hoarded. It's like this university is hiding its nuclear research. This, like information was segregated, hoarded, and part of state secrets.
Yeah.
And free trade also kind of happened with information.
Yeah.
Right? Like technology was shared. It was like the last 30, 40 years have been fairly big on technological innovation.
Yep.
Just because like
Information age. I mean,
OpenAI comes, DeepSeek comes, like everyone's building off other people's prior art because we're all sharing how we're doing it.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. So, I mean, it used to be that if you wanted to know something, you had to read the actual journal where that information was published. Like, you don't need to do any of that now. It's all on the internet, right? And you want to, like, people pre-read papers and learn from it, right? Yeah. So information is absolutely global.
And I think there was, like, part of this trade, like, what started I remember this back in, like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. The first trade war around tariffs had a lot to do with intellectual property, not trades in goods.
Brain drain.
Yeah, it was like, between China and the U.S., what's happening with source code and intellectual property? Like that was actually like tariff trade war around like, hey, because China at one point China sent a policy saying, any software you come into my country we need to have source code and open source. right? So you, U.S. companies, must give us all of your source code IP,
Yep.
right? And like some companies exited, some companies went. Like that was.
I think that was even true for, I think, even manufactured goods as well. There was some IP that, was gained.
Right. And I think it was the concept of trying to open up the information age around information sharing. So protectionist policies can apply to goods and services, but IP and information as well.
Yep. Absolutely.
So if you close these things, I don't think the closing is just happening on goods and services. I think IP and information, like think about a world. And the first time I lived in Shanghai, this was like post-Maoist era Shanghai. Like I lived there and worked on an engineering site there. There was a generation of people that grew up in closed Maoist China. And I remember this. There was a leader in my group, Kai. He's like, when we grew up as children, we were told that no one had meat on the planet, and we were lucky to have meat once a month, right? Because it was a closed information economy.
Right.
And then we had other like people that I hired that were younger, that were post-Maoist, that never knew that in that world, right? Because information was flowing in and out of China. There was a closed information and an open information like line that had kind of crossed.
Coming across, yep.
Right? So could we go to closed information channels in the world?
I hope that one of the good things that technology has brought about is that is no longer possible. I think people will try. I think people could try.
Florida's already tried. So this was the fascinating thing when Florida said we need to ban underage porn, so people need to verify their age to access porn in Florida and Texas.
Right.
And it was the highest sales of VPNs on the planet, like instantaneously.
Yeah,
so
how do you prove location digitally? Well, you can get around that pretty easily, right?
Yeah. So I think it was already attempted and failed the day one it was tried.
Yeah. I think we are in a world now where there's enough technologists around the world, at least for a short period of time, where I don't think that can happen.
Okay.
I think people could try. I do think we'll see more and more export bans. So I think one way that people try to control IP is bans. Mm-hmm. And so we definitely saw that, and we are seeing that, right? Bans of AI chips to China in certain countries, like that definitely is happening because there's worry that if you have the materials to create some of these technologies, then you can outpace the United States, so you don't get the materials.
Yeah, well, that was uranium enrichment.
Exactly. So I don't think I think we've transitioned to a world where you can't necessarily control the knowledge, but you can control the substrate required to use the knowledge.
Well, and I think that's true in semiconductors with lithography and those types of things.
Exactly. So I don't think that is the world. I think we're in this weird. So I think one of two things are going to happen. We're in this power play world, or we're in this world where, hey, we're going to get rid. Globalization, I think another thing it led to was, my feeling is strong predictability in supply chains, mm-hmm. or improved predictability, mm-hmm. right? And that's why we got to all these just-in-time supply chains and things like that. The COVID, we're like, oh, maybe we went a little too far.
Yeah. Cold chain's interesting.
Exactly.
Too.
I think we could get into a world now where we have what if this continues, right? What if going forward, policymakers around the world just decide we like chaos in the system. We're gonna keep just pulling levers and see what happens and use it as a way to control. Could business adjust? Like, does this lead to the end of industrialization? Like,
I think it goes one of two ways, right? One world is like we've seen what high volatility economies look like, and that always ends up in spot pricing. Right? It's like the price of gold today is $2. It's $1 tomorrow. Crypto's super high volatility. The price of a crypto thing, right? It's super volatile. Imagine every good was that way. So you go to a grocery store, nothing has a price. And you scan the UPC code with your phone, or you scan it at checkout, and one day it's $1, next day it's $70, the next day it's $5, the next day it's $4, and that's the new reality, right? Everything's built on a spot pricing market because the business, if your costs are variable, super highly variable based on policies and levers,
right,
a system will be built to compensate for predictability.
That's fair.
Right? And that just means the end consumer has high volatility. And imagine the same thing had to happen to your income. Your hourly rate today was this, and the cost of your labor tomorrow is that, right? Like, because we're just living in a completely different economic system where the same things that have followed high volatility things end up hitting there. The other extreme is it goes the other way, which is the companies that can deliver predictability are companies you decided, or countries or companies that deliver predictability are people who I choose to do business with.
Right.
So I don't need to pass that volatility to end consumers. I think we as humans, as much as a small percentage might be open to novel experiences and new and adventure, I think it's all to a degree. I think the part of the human nature is a set of like, I live within a comfort tolerance.
Exactly. The sun is going to come up tomorrow.
Right? We all, like, some people are a little bit like, oh, I want every day to be a little special. But I think on the broad spectrum of things in Maslow's hierarchy, we want certain things very stable.
Exactly.
Because the foundation of the modern society was built on a stable foundation.
100%.
Right? So I think you end up in very dystopian ends when you take away core stability.
Yeah.
So my predictability is business will move to companies or suppliers or countries that can provide more stability.
Yeah.
Right. And
it's almost like it's almost like insurance, right? It's basically saying like, you're going to pass on a fixed price, but you're going to deal with the adjustable variability internally, right?
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you're...
Yeah. And look, we haven't seen how that experiment ends, because you look at insurance providers and they're all kind of going belly up and are like, ooh, we did this actuarials wrong, or like a forest fire in California completely crushed it and we're exiting the state. And you know what I mean? So I think those, like, insurance is a good example because they tried to create stability.
Yep.
Right? They're like, okay, you might have high variable costs in case of a disaster. We're going to amortize it across a population.
Yep.
We're going to build a risk table to decide what your pricing is within your risk table. And, it works.
And you make plenty of money until you don't.
Well, everything's about risk tolerance. Yes. When you fall outside of those bounds, the model goes belly up.
Yep. That's
right. And with insurance, it might be global warming that's causing all the fires that are like whatever, right? So we know volatility is increasing. So is that an argument that the stability model won't work and we'll move to a spot model?
I don't know. I mean, I think you're right. I think we'll end up with it creates a whole new layer of economics, to be honest, where I think the supply chain just changes entirely. So again, as an engineer, my understanding of the globalization in general was that the supply chain had become a highly efficient mechanism, right? Which is there's very little sort of margin being taken along the way between where a good is manufactured to when I can actually get it and consume it and pass it on to another good, right? I don't think we'll end up with spike pricing because, I mean, I don't even know how I would deal with having a salary that's variable along with rent that's variable along with, I can't understand that world. I think people will want consistency. I want to be able to know that I have rent for a year at a fixed price, I have a salary, and so on. And to accommodate that, I think we end up having people sandbag throughout the system. I think that's the only way it could work out, right? You get efficiency back by having people basically taking sufficient cuts that can have risk tolerance. Yeah,
you're building risk tolerance into the pricing model. Like one of the things, and this is a personal plug for Pure right here, we have an Evergreen One offering for storage that fixes your rate for the contract term, right? So if you sign up for EG1 right now, which you should,
right now,
as of right now, right? But basically, you should sign up because it'll fix the stability during your contract period for your storage costs, and you'll get a guaranteed consumption rate over that time. Like you're passing the risk and variability.
Until literally you.
Onto Pure, right? So I say that as a double-edged sword because I'm living a little bit riskier, right? But you're not, right? So as a vendor, we've decided to take on that risk to provide stability to our end users.
Yeah. And I think we'll see more of that, right?
And maybe because some of our, like I've seen, contracts and suppliers and what's going on. And there's some people that are like, this quote is expiring tomorrow.
Yeah.
right? And just get a new quote every day. That's kind of moving towards spot pricing.
It is, absolutely.
Right? You have other people that are like, this quote is good for 90 days, subject to no tariff changes, which is like, it may or may not change. So like people are dealing with the volatility and variable in a variety of ways, right? At some point, we're trying to stabilize the foundation. And I do think we both agree that as humans, we want some level of comfort and stability.
100%.
So the question is, with all of these moving factors, right, with trade deficits and inflation and consumption and all of these different variables, the job of economists in the past have been hard, but now we're very connected.
Yeah.
Right? When you manufacture something, it might get manufactured in China and then sent to Mexico, and then a part might come from the U.S. into Mexico, and then the finished goods might come back into the U.S. So it may not be like, hey, this is a 40% tariff on the inbound to U.S. It might be 40 plus 40 plus 40. Like
it compounds,
It compounds. This might be a compounded tariff where the thing's not going up 40%. It's going up 400%. Right? So you have to rebalance and replan supply chains around a tariff world if this pans out.
Yeah.
Right? Let's hope this is the art of the negotiation. Everyone comes to the table and this all goes away.
If it doesn't go away, I think it goes back to what you talked about before, because you were talking about history and where these things lead. I think history, I don't know of a counterpoint to this, but anytime a tariff has stayed around long enough, I don't think economies have just adjusted. I think it's led to a major historical event.
Yeah. And those were all wars.
Those were all wars. Yeah. Yeah. It's not good. I mean, I think the Great Depression was, compounded by this. So there's maybe not a war there, but there's the Great Depression. That's worse, right? So that's why I think I'm hoping this is just a negotiation tactic, and kind of everything we're talking about is theoretical.
Yeah, but World War II actually helped us get out of the Great Depression for labor work.
It did. That's fair.
Right.
Okay, fair enough. So then eventually it led to the thing that got us out of it, right? So it's yeah.
Yeah. So so let's think about like the future a little bit, right? So in the future, I would posit that AI can be something that changes this equation, this labor force equation. So we have to rethink protectionism in AI, but also economic modeling. So there's this concept of value driver trees, right? And for those who don't know, look it up, value driver trees. And, Naveen describes it as a neural net, but, it looks like a neural net, but it's basically you're trying to figure out the drivers of economy, right? Or you're trying to figure out if I move this, what happens to this, right? If I raise my prices, how much does my inventory need to change?
Yeah, it's like a dependency graph of an outcome of, let's say, return on investment.
Yeah.
So that's why it looks like a neural net. It's a propagation graph, right?
Correct. So I think people need to become familiar with this concept is a new way of thinking. Analytics is not the answer here. I think you have to think about value driver trees. But if you apply, we know AIs as GPT transformers and chat models and, we're training music models, but what if you could build an AI economic model? Like you apply AI to say, what is an economic model for a value driver tree? Instead of humans deciding what the values, the drivers, and the weights are, we use economic observability to generate a value driver tree, and then, unlike simulating tariffs in the real world, in the stock market that we're all living through as of yesterday.
Right. Or asking, I think there's a theory that maybe just asking ChatGPT what tariff policy you should apply, because it kind of looks like what just happened.
Yeah. Because ChatGPT wasn't built for that. I think an AI VDT model where you could say, here's a simulated game of Risk with the planet, right? Built on an economic model on proven value driver trees. If I move this lever, what happens to all the things? Right? I don't think pre-AI we could have built that model.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? I think post-AI we probably can.
So, I mean, yeah, it's true. So in a future world where we get out of this mess, I think a tool like that could be two things. One, I think it'd be incredibly valuable to businesses in general. But I think it could be valuable to policymakers, right? To understand, hey, if I do this, what happens? Or where do I have the most leverage for the policy I'm trying to apply?
Yeah.
But I think it comes back to kind of our discussion on data, right? You need to have some intent. What are you trying to do? Because without any knowledge of what you're trying to do, this is all chaos, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. So, okay. I think good discussion of tariffs, right? I think if we were to recap,
From non-economists.
from non-economists, historically, we've seen this before, but the problem, and it's all grounded in protectionism, which has led to wars,
Yeah.
right? That doesn't, this time around, it's different because it's AI, I think. It's not a labor factor.
Yeah, it's unclear what it is.
Yeah. I think you said, hey, your feeling is the form, you think income tax is not going away.
No.
Or progressive taxes, do you see progressive tariff policies?
I really think globalization, for all of its flaws and so on, like that is the path forward. Like I think we go back to that. I think this gets undone in the end through rational thinking or forced outcome.
Okay, you don't believe the path to nationalism is coming.
I hope not, but I also don't think it's plausible. I think
we're too connected.
I think we're too connected.
Yeah. So look, every movie and dystopian future tells us that what unifies humans is aliens. So maybe just aliens will come and then we'll have a common enemy and then we won't fight with each other anymore. Right?
Yeah.
Like Independence Day.
Exactly.
Right? And, so final word, what would your advice be to people in this kind of times?
I can only tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some deep breaths. I'm going to go take a walk outside tomorrow, and I'm going to just try not to watch the news because I think things are changing rapidly, but I don't think this is the end game.
Yeah, I think that's right. My advice is no knee-jerk reactions. Think long-term. For investors, think Warren Buffett. The long game, the market always wins.
Exactly.
But I think if you're in the short-term policy-making decision, of which, I kind of find myself, plan for high uncertainty for a little while.
Yeah.
So I think with that, we'll close it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.